5 years shattered, when love became a joke and doubt stole my future forever. The rain came down in relentless curtains, drumming against the roof of my beat-up Honda Civic like 1,000 tiny fists. I sat there, engine off, parked outside Brew Haven, a cozy little coffee shop on the edge of town. The neon sign flickered through the wet blur of my windshield. Open, a mocking beacon in the gray dusk. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as I stared at the clock on the dash, 5:45 p.m. In 15 minutes, I'd walk inside to meet Valerie, Dominic's mom, who'd called me that morning, her voice breaking over the line, begging me to hear something she couldn't or wouldn't say over the phone. My stomach churned, a nauseous swirl of dread and confusion. 5 years with Dominic, 5 years of love, laughter, and a life I thought we'd build forever, now felt like sand slipping through my fingers. I glanced at the engagement ring on my left hand, a simple white gold band with a small, round diamond catching the faint glow of the dashboard light. It used to feel like a promise, warm and solid. Now it was cold, heavy, a question I didn't know how to answer. I wasn't supposed to be here, parked in the rain, wondering if my entire world was about to collapse. 5 years ago, I was just Margot, 24, a little awkward, a little loud, working reception at a dental office and living in a cramped studio with peeling paint. Dominic was the guy who stumbled into my life at a housewarming party thrown by our mutual friend, Jess. I can still see it. The crowded living room, the smell of burnt popcorn wafting from the kitchen, and Dominic standing by the beer pong table, his broad shoulders slouched in a faded flannel shirt. He had dark hair that flopped over his forehead and a crooked grin that made my chest flutter. I was in a green sweater, clutching a solo cup of lukewarm lager, trying to explain the finer points of beer pong to him. "You've got to arc it, not just chuck it," I'd teased, laughing as he missed the cup by a mile. He'd smirked, shaking his head. "Guess I'm hopeless. Good thing you hate IPAs as much as I do, or I'd be out of luck." That was our spark. Small, silly, perfect. We bonded over our shared loathing of bitter beer and a love for 90s cartoons, Animaniacs, Pinky and the Brain, the kind of shows we'd watch on my ancient laptop, sprawled across a thrift store couch with bowls of Lucky Charms. He'd do terrible impressions of Yakko Warner, and I'd snort milk through my nose, laughing until my sides hurt. It was easy, natural, like we'd always known each other. We swapped numbers that night, and by the next weekend, we were texting nonstop. Dumb memes, random thoughts, plans for a real date. Our first was at a diner downtown, splitting a plate of greasy fries and arguing over whether The Simpsons peaked in season 8 or 10. He won me over with his earnestness, the way he listened when I rambled about my day, his hazel eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled. A year later, we were official, boyfriend and girlfriend, a label that felt both thrilling and safe. We'd spend evenings at his place or mine, cooking spaghetti with jarred sauce because neither of us could afford anything fancier, dancing barefoot in the kitchen to a scratched CD of 90s hits. After 2 years, we took the plunge and moved in together. A one-bedroom apartment with creaky floors and a view of a brick wall, but it was ours. I'd painted the living room a soft blue, and he'd hung mismatched frames of us, goofy selfies from a county fair, a shot of us bundled in scarves at a snowy park. We adopted Beans, a scruffy tabby with a torn ear, from a shelter on our 3rd anniversary. She'd curl up between us on the couch, purring like a tiny motor, and I'd think, this is it. This is home. Last summer, 4 years in, he proposed. It wasn't some grand, Instagram-worthy moment. No flash mob, no hidden photographer. Just us, hiking up to Miller's Lookout, a spot we'd claimed as ours after a dozen treks. The air was thick with pine and morning mist, the valley stretching out below like a watercolor painting. I was ahead, teasing him for lagging, when he called my name. I turned, and there he was, down on one knee, his hands trembling as he pulled a ring box from his jacket pocket. "Margot," he'd said, voice cracking, "I want forever with you. Will you marry me?" The ring wobbled in his grip, and I didn't even let him finish before I blurted, "Yes." I threw my arms around him, laughing through tears, the world spinning as he slid that diamond onto my finger. We sat there for hours, planning a life, kids someday, a house with a yard, growing old trading terrible cartoon impressions. We set the wedding for October, 8 months from the proposal, a crisp fall day with leaves crunching underfoot. I dove into planning, my nights filled with Pinterest boards and vendor calls. I'd show Dominic venue photos, rustic barns with fairy lights, a lakeside gazebo, and he'd nod, half listening, murmuring, "Looks good, babe." I'd pick out save the dates, a creamy cardstock with gold foil, and he'd shrug. "Whatever you like." At first, I thought it was just him being laid back. Guys don't care about flowers, right? But 3 months ago, something shifted. His replies got shorter, his eyes distant. I'd text him caterer menus, chicken or beef, and he'd take hours to respond with a flat, "Fine," or "Up to you." I'd catch him staring at his phone, thumb hovering like he was somewhere else. "You okay?" I'd ask, brushing his arm. "Just work," he'd say, forcing a smile. "Big projects stressing me out." His construction company was expanding, he said, and I believed him. I wanted to. Then the nights out started. Paul, his loudmouth work friend, became a fixture. Beers after shifts, football at Paul's place, guys' nights that stretched later and later. Dominic would stumble in, smelling of bar smoke and hops, barely mumbling a hello before crashing on the couch. Beans would leap up to greet him, and he'd scratch her ears absently, his mind miles away. I'd lie awake in our bed, the space beside me cold, wondering why he didn't reach for me anymore. I tried talking to Lena over coffee at her place, her kitchen table cluttered with nursing textbooks. She leaned back, braiding her dark hair, and said, "Sounds like cold feet, Margot. Weddings freak guys out. Plan a date night, remind him why he fell for you." Her hazel eyes were steady, certain, and I clung to that hope like a lifeline. So last Friday, I pulled out all the stops. I booked a table at Bella Vita, a new Italian place with dim lights and red checkered tablecloths, the kind of spot we'd have loved in our early days. I slipped into a navy dress I'd found at a thrift shop, soft fabric that hugged my hips. Nothing fancy, but enough to make me feel pretty. I curled my hair, a messy cascade of brown waves, and even bought his favorite stout to chill in the fridge for later. I wanted to see that crooked grin again, to feel his hand squeeze mine under the table. But dinner was a disaster from the first sip of wine. He sat across from me, hunched in his chair, scrolling his phone while I chattered about honeymoon ideas. A cottage by the sea, walks on the beach, just us. He didn't look up. I pushed my ravioli around my plate, the sauce congealing, and tried again. "What do you think about the coast? We could rent a place with a deck, listen to the waves." He set his phone down, slow, deliberate, and looked at me, really looked at me for the first time all night. His eyes were tired, shadowed. "Margot," he said, voice low, "I'm not sure I'm ready for all this." The words hit like a punch, knocking the air from my lungs. "All this?" I whispered, my fork clattering against the plate. "The honeymoon? The wedding? What are you saying?" He rubbed his face, stubble rasping under his palms. "Everything," he admitted. "Marriage, it changes stuff. Paul's been telling me about his brother's divorce. It's a mess, Margot. I don't know." My throat tightened, a sob clawing its way up, but I swallowed it down. Not here, not in front of strangers sipping Chianti. 5 years, I said, barely audible. 8 months engaged, and now you don't know? He wouldn't meet my eyes, just stared at his untouched lasagna like it held the answers. I pressed him, my voice trembling but firm. "What's changed, Dom? Talk to me." He sighed, heavy and defeated. "Paul says marriage traps you. His brother lost everything. House, kids, half his paycheck. I've been thinking, what if that's us?" I wanted to scream that we weren't Paul's brother, that we were us. Margot and Dominic, the couple who'd laughed through power outages and danced in a thunderstorm, but the words stuck and the silence stretched, thick and suffocating. We paid the bill, split it like strangers, and drove home without speaking, the hum of the engine louder than our breathing. At the apartment, he deflected again. "I need time to think," he muttered, grabbing a blanket and crashing on the couch. I stood in the doorway, watching him turn away, and felt the first crack splinter through my heart. Saturday morning was a funeral march in slow motion. I woke to sunlight slicing through the blinds, beans purring at my feet, and Dominic already up, sipping coffee like nothing had happened. His hair was a mess, his flannel wrinkled, and he avoided my gaze as I shuffled into the kitchen. "I'm meeting Paul and the guys at the Rusty Nail," he said, voice flat. Game's on. I nodded. Too drained to argue, the fight bled out of me. He left without a goodbye, and I sank onto the couch, Beans climbing into my lap. Her warmth was the only thing tethering me to the room. Lena called an hour later, her voice bright through the fog. Get out of there, Margot. Meet me for coffee. You can't sit in that apartment all day. She was right. Staying would have drowned me. We met at Percolate, a hole-in-the-wall cafe with chipped mugs and the best espresso in town. I spilled everything over a latte. His doubts, his distance, the way he'd gutted me at dinner. Lena listened, her brow furrowed, stirring sugar into her black coffee. Cold feet, she said again, softer this time. He's freaking out. It happens. Give him space, but don't let him off the hook. I nodded, clinging to her optimism, and we wandered to Target afterward, my stress relief ritual. I bought throw pillows in shades of teal and a lavender shampoo that smelled like summer, piling my cart with distractions. It wasn't enough to fill the hole, but it kept me moving. I was pulling into our complex, the sky bruising purple with evening, when my phone buzzed. A text from Kyler, Dominic's coworker, a lanky guy with a shy smile I'd met at the company Christmas party, where he'd told corny jokes over spiked eggnog. Hey, Margot, you okay? Things got weird at the Rusty Nail. My pulse spiked, a cold sweat prickling my neck. I called him, skipping the pleasantries. What happened, Kyler? He hesitated, his voice low, reluctant. I don't want to stir stuff up, but you should know. With some coaxing, he spilled it. The guys were at the bar, packed around a sticky table, TVs blaring the game. Paul, loud and smirking, had started in on Dominic. Ready to lock it down with one woman forever, huh? Dominic, 3 beers in, had faltered. Mumbling he wasn't sure about the wedding timing. Paul pushed harder. What's the holdup, man? And Dominic, slurring and laughing, said, if she was prettier, I'd marry her tomorrow morning. The table went silent, Kyler said, the air sucking out of the room. He and a couple others called Dominic out. That's messed up, man. But Dominic bristled, snapping, can't you take a joke? I thanked Kyler, my voice a ghost, and hung up. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering onto the passenger seat, and I cried. Huge, ugly sobs that shook my whole body. 5 years of love, trust, a ring on my finger, and he'd turned me into a punchline, my face the butt of a barroom jest. Every memory twisted, every compliment he'd given me, every time he'd called me beautiful, now felt like a lie. I sat there for 20 minutes, rain starting to patter against the windshield, until my eyes burned and my chest felt hollow. When I finally went inside, Dominic was passed out on the couch, still in his work boots and jeans, an empty beer can tipped over on the coffee table. The apartment reeked of stale hops and regret. Beans meowed, weaving between my legs, and I scooped her up, locking myself in the bedroom. I curled under the quilt we'd bought together at a flea market, her purring a faint comfort against the storm in my head, and cried until sleep dragged me under. Sunday morning crept in, gray and heavy, the rain a steady hum outside. I woke to the clatter of pans, Dominic in the kitchen, flipping bacon, brewing coffee. His apology breakfast, a ritual from smaller fights, burnt toast after he'd forgotten my birthday, pancakes when he'd bailed on a date for a work emergency. He stood at the stove, hungover and sheepish, his eyes bloodshot, hair a tangle. Hey, he said softly, like I was a deer he might spook. I didn't sit, didn't touch the food. Kyler told me, I said, my voice rough, scraped raw from tears. His face fell, the spatula trembling in his hand. Margot, he started, but I cut him off. You said if I was prettier, you'd marry me, in front of everyone. He dropped the spatula, stepping toward me, hands outstretched. I was drunk, babe. Stupid. Paul was ragging on me. You're whipped, man, tied down. And I said something dumb to shut him up. I didn't mean it. Didn't mean it? I echoed, my voice rising, cracking. You humiliated me, Dom. You made me a joke because of how I look. He flinched, scrubbing a hand over his face. It's not about your looks. You're beautiful. I've always thought that. It's the wedding, the pressure. Work's a mess, the budget's tight, and Paul's filling my head with crap about marriage failing. I panicked. His excuses piled up, a flimsy wall I couldn't climb. So you trash me to your buddies instead of talking to me? I snapped. 5 years, and that's what I get? He reached for me, but I stepped back, the bacon sizzling behind him like static in my ears. I'm sorry, he whispered, eyes pleading. I messed up bad. Let me fix it. I couldn't look at him. His guilt, his desperation. I grabbed my purse, my keys jangling, and bolted for the door. I can't do this right now, I choked out, fleeing to Elliot's. My brother's apartment was a refuge, pine-scented, cluttered with takeout boxes and gym gear, a second-hand couch sagging under years of use. Elliot was in the kitchen, flipping through a car magazine, his sandy hair a mess. He took one look at my puffy eyes and dropped the magazine. What did that asshole do? He growled, fist clenching. I sank onto the couch, spilling it all. The dinner, the bar, the way Dominic had shredded me in front of his friends. Elliot's jaw tightened, his blue eyes flashing. I'll kill him, he said, half standing. Elliot, no, I pleaded, grabbing his arm. I just need to be here, please. He relented, sitting beside me, his arm heavy around my shoulders. You're too good for him, Margot. Always have been. I leaned into him, the big brother who'd patched my scraped knees as a kid and let the tears come again. Dominic's texts buzzed all day. I'm so sorry. Please come home. We can work this out. I stared at them, my thumb hovering over the screen until I typed back, I need time, and silenced my phone. Monday, I called in sick to work, my boss's voice gentle through the receiver. Take care of yourself, hon, she said. I couldn't face the dental office, smiling at patients, answering phones like my life wasn't imploding. I stayed in Elliot's spare room, a cramped space with a futon and boxes of his old comics, scrolling Reddit for distraction. Around 9 a.m., my phone rang. Valerie. Her voice was thick, trembling. Margot, it's me. Dominic called me last night, upset. There's something important you need to know. Can we meet? Please? My heart stuttered. What is it? I asked, but she just said, not over the phone. Brew Haven, 6 p.m.? I agreed, my mind racing. What could she possibly say that Dominic couldn't? Now I'm here, rain-soaked and shaking, parked outside the coffee shop. The ring glints again, a cruel taunt. 5 years, late-night talks, road trips with beans in her carrier, a proposal under a misty sky. And it's come to this. Was I blind? His hesitance over wedding plans, his nights with Paul, the way he'd stopped holding me like he meant it? Were those signs I ignored? Too scared to see the truth? Or did he change, drifting away while I held onto a memory? Valerie's waiting inside, her figure slumped by the window, and I'm terrified. Is it about his doubts? Something worse? My hand hovers over the door handle, the rain a steady roar, and I take a breath. Whatever she says, it's the end of something, or maybe the beginning. I don't know, not yet. After dating for 5 years, my fiancé told me he wasn't sure about marrying me, and now I'm meeting his mom to uncover the truth.